How do you one-up the Tiffany blue watch trend and take it from a number 10 to a number 11? Well, you add a textured dial to it, of course. This 39mm automatic dress watch is one of the latest textured dial watches from AddiesDive. This is the AddiesDive model number AD2118. Now, full disclosure, AddiesDive was kind enough to send me this watch to review on my channel, and I will be sending the watch back once I'm done. With that said, you, of course, still get my full and honest review of the watch, just like you always do. Now, at the time of this video, you can find this watch at AddiesDiveWatches.com for $129 US. AddiesDive is offering a 20% discount when you use the link in the description of this video. So if you're interested, check out the discount in the description below and save yourself that 20%. So if you've happened to look at the new watches from AddiesDive lately, you might have noticed that 4 out of the 12 watches have a textured pattern to them. And I think that's a pretty smart move on their part, especially when it comes to dress watches. Because dress watches always have to do more with less when it comes to design. Now, they are currently using 2 different wave patterns. A longer wave pattern that looks like something you'd find in a sand dune, and then this shorter wave pattern that reminds me of choppy waters. And I do think that both these patterns are definitely helping out the overall appearance of their watches. Hey everyone, if you like these videos, please do me a favor and consider subscribing. It would really help out the channel. Now let's get on with the review. The case construction is 316L stainless steel, with a diameter coming in at 39mm, not including the crown. On the side of the watch, we have a lug-to-lug distance of a very compact 47.3mm, and for an overall thickness, 14.5mm, which includes that domed sapphire crystal. Now, initially, one of my concerns was whether or not this would look too small on my 7-inch wrist. But I have to say, I think it wears really well. I think this is a great size for a dress watch. The 39mm case size and the short lug-to-lug distance makes it not only hug my wrist, but adds an overall sense of elegance as well. And that, of course, is exactly what you want from a dress watch. For finishing, we have a brushed finish on top of the case, done in a vertical direction, which thankfully matches the bracelet. As you know, it is one of my pet peeves when the finishing on the lugs does not match the bracelet. So I do appreciate the decision to be consistent here. The brushed finish on this watch is very well done and looks top-notch. It has a satin appearance to it. On side of the case and on the bezel, we have a high polished finish, giving this watch a dual finish to it. And where the top and the sides of the case meet, there is a nice and clear distinction between the 2 finishes. Now, this is a very classic case shape, and it is well suited for this type of watch. All the edges here are nice and smooth to the touch, even the bottom of the case. Moving on to the back of the watch, we have a screw-down case back, and it is a little surprising given the fact that this is a dress watch, but it also helps to explain it having 100 meters of water resistance. Now, the logo in the center is the same treatment found on the dive watches from AddiesDive, and while I like it on the dive watches, here I feel it doesn't really fit the upscale, elegant look of a dress watch. I would have preferred them to have some other logo treatment, perhaps only using the AddiesDive text. I'm not sure the underwater goggles and the spear guns work as well on a dress watch as it does on a dive watch. But keep in mind, it is a very minor gripe, as it's on the back of the watch and it is never going to be seen when it's actually worn. Now, in addition to the logo, we also have text on the case back that reads all stainless steel, automatic movement NH35, AddiesDive, and Divers 100 meter. Okay, time for another small gripe here. Why does it say divers when this is a dress watch? I don't know. It seems like just another carryover from their dive watch design. It's also a little surprising that they don't mention the sapphire crystal on the case back. everyone prefers the sapphire crystal. Personally, I would have listed that instead of spelling out automatic movement, because it already says NH35 and that really communicates the same thing. Now, I know I'm nitpicking here, calling out minor things to bring to your attention, but that's also because there's no major issues with the design or build quality of this watch. Moving on to the inside of the case, we have the tried and true NH35 automatic movement, and that of course has 24 joules, beats at 21,600 beats an hour, has a 41-hour power reserve, it does hack, and it does hand wind. Turning the crown 55 times will get it fully round up, and it does have an accuracy of -20 to +40 seconds per day. Now at the 3 o'clock position, we have a signed crown, which is approximately 5.5 millimeters in width and 3.5 millimeters in depth. Obviously no crown guards here, keeping a case very clean and classic in my opinion. Now during my everyday testing, I had no issues with threading the crown on or off, or hand winding the movement. The watch does have a nice pop to it when pulling the crown out to its different positions. Now this is a screw down crown, so you do need to unscrew it before you can hand wind it. To set the time, simply pull it out to the first position, rotating it sets the date, and pulling out to the second position hacks the second hand and sets the time. Moving on to the face of the watch, we have a black minute track printed directly on the dial. Now because of the distortion from the dome sapphire, you do need to look at it from a slight angle to see the minute track. We also have applied metallic indices here, which have a high polished beveled edge to them, helping them to catch the light. These indices also taper down and get thinner as they move towards the center of the dial. Now the indices at the top of the dial is slightly wider than the others, and all of this, quite honestly, is very subtle to the naked eye. And in my opinion, that makes it all the more impressive, because AddiesDive is not hitting you over the head here with design details, but instead is just hoping that you're going to get a subtle sense of the overall feeling from this watch. Now also at the 12 o'clock position, we have the AddiesDive logo, and I have heard some people comment that it just looks odd on a dress watch. And to an extent, I kind of agree. Ideally, they would have figured out a way to make their logo feel less rugged and more refined on their dress watches. A secondary logo, if you will. But it doesn't overly bother me here on the dial, in part because it's not as large as it is on the case back. Moving down the dial, on the other side of the center post, we find the words automatic and 100 meters done in all caps. The date window at the 3 o'clock position is printed black on white with a metallic outline to it. Now during my everyday testing with this watch, I found it to be very legible. Let's get on to what is obviously the main attraction here, and that being of course the wavy textured pattern of the dial itself. Now I should point out here that this watch comes in either the blue dial you see here or a white dial, both of which have this textured pattern to them. You'll see in some of my photos that the blue is more vibrant, and that is only because of the way my lights are hitting the watch. In reality, the color is this pale light blue color, and I think that is what you want here. You don't want the color to take away from the texture pattern. The dolphin's hands and the blue second hand are nicely sized on this watch, meeting up with the minute track, both of which I found to be very legible against the dial. The light seems to always catch and reflect off the metallic hands and provides enough contrast against the light blue color. This is a very classic looking watch, and more than one person has commented to me that it has some Grand Seiko vibes going on. I'm not 100% sure I agree with that myself, but it is a very pleasant looking watch in my opinion. Now this is a traditional dress watch, meaning that there is no loom here to speak of. What this watch does have, however, is a sapphire crystal with anti-reflective coating. It is a nice dome crystal which does account for 2 or 3 millimeters of that overall 14.5 millimeter thickness. But on the plus side, it does make this watch feel much more sophisticated than a flat piece of crystal would have. And that brings us to the bracelet. Now it is 20 millimeters wide at the lugs and tapers down to 16 millimeters at the clasp. It is a double push button release signed clasp with 5 micro adjustments and a milled scissor section. And that is a very welcome feature at this price point. Now the edges of the clasp are not as smooth as everywhere else on the watch, and I did have a couple of issues here. The first being, initially there was a very sharp burr still attached to the clasp. I plucked at it with my fingernail and it came right off. So now the sharp edge is gone. My second issue with this clasp is that I had a lot of trouble with the micro adjustments. I spoke with another person who had the same issue. I assumed that the spring bar was either a millimeter or two too long or thick. He thought that the micro adjustment holes weren't drilled properly. Now I did swap out the spring bar for another one I had on hand, and that did solve the issue. I did reach out to my contact at AddiesDive about this, and they said it was the first they've heard about it and they would try to make improvements in the future. I have to give their customer service credit here. They do seem very responsive and open to hearing about any potential issues. Now for the rest of the bracelet, it is a solid link bracelet with solid end links. Another nice feature to have at this price point. The bracelet sits flush with the top of the lugs and folds all the way under the case itself. Sure, the articulation could be slightly better, but I found this bracelet to be a good daily wearer. So let's go over the specs for this watch. We have a sapphire crystal, the automatic NH35 movement, a diameter of 39 millimeters, a thickness of 14.5 millimeters, a lug width of 20 millimeters, lug-to-lug distance of 47.3 millimeters, and finally a water resistance of 100 meters. And finally, let's wrap up by going over the pros and cons. For pros, aesthetics. It is a good looking watch with a trendy light blue color and a wavy pattern on the dial. You also get a sapphire crystal. It's very legible, has a good fits and finish. You do get 100 meters of water resistance, and that NH35 movement is going to hack and hand wind. For cons, the clasp. I did have trouble with the micro adjustments, but I'm sure it's not that way on every watch. The logo, it's obviously designed for a dive watch, and this is a dress watch. It feels a little out of place. And then lastly, at 14.5 millimeters, it is a little on the thick side for a dress watch. So my final thoughts on this watch. I think this is a solid watch for the money, no doubt about it. I also think there's not as much need for dress watches as before COVID, but that doesn't actually take away from the watch. If dress watches are your thing, then by all means, go for it. Okay, my friends, that's it. Until the next time, remember, buy whatever it is that you love. This is your watch collection. I'll see you in the next video.